How did you get your father-in-law's approval? My girlfriend Katya warned me 100 times about her father. He's old-school Russian, military background, hates Americans, thinks we're all soft. She showed me a photo of her sister's ex-boyfriend leaving their house with a bloody nose after failing some kind of test. The guy was a banker from Connecticut and lasted exactly one dinner. Papa has this thing, she explained. He and his friends from the factory will challenge any boyfriend to prove himself. Drinking games, arm wrestling, sometimes worse. So I did what any desperate person would do. Started taking Russian lessons in secret, 6 months of practice. Russian podcasts during my commute, Soviet movies with subtitles. Even started hanging out at this Russian bathhouse in Brighton Beach, where old men played cards and complained about everything. The night finally came. Their house in Queens. I brought flowers for her mother. Odd number, never even. That's for funerals. Good vodka for her father. Chocolates for her grandmother. Victor was sitting with 3 other men, all in their 60s, all looking like they could bench press a car. American boy wants to date my Katya, Victor said, barely looking up from his cards. The men were speaking Russian, making comments about my clothes. Too neat. My handshake. Acceptable. My chances. 0. They assumed I couldn't understand. $20 says he throws up before the 3rd shot, one said in Russian. Victor stood up. You know how we do things? You want my daughter? You drink with us. You refuse. You leave. He set down homemade Samagon. Probably 140 proof. Clear as water. Strong enough to strip paint. No Zakuski until I say. No food between shots. Basically a death sentence. First shot. I knocked it back smooth. No face, no cough. The boy didn't flinch, Dmitri muttered in Russian. Second shot, 3rd shot, 4th. My stomach was on fire, but I kept my face neutral. Now we play game, Victor announced. 6 glasses, 5 have vodka, 1 has water. If you get water, you lose. You leave, never come back. In Russian, Pavel whispered, they're all vodka. We just tell him 1 is water. I reached for the closest glass. Downed it. Vodka, obviously. I lose? I asked in English, playing dumb. No, that was vodka. Continue. 5 rounds, 17 shots deep. These old Russians barely swaying while my liver screamed for mercy. He's still standing, Sergei said in Russian. The Connecticut boy passed out after 12. Let's see how he handles truth, Victor replied in Russian. Then in English, you want to marry my daughter? I love your daughter. Love. American word. Means nothing. He switched to Russian, talking to his friends. These Americans think love is enough. No understanding of sacrifice, of strength. At least he can drink, Dmitri admitted in Russian. But can he provide? He works with computers, Victor said dismissively in Russian. Soft hands. Katya could have married Alexei, Pavel added. Good Russian boy, owns 3 auto shops. Victor poured another round. Last test. You tell joke. Make us laugh. You fail, you leave. I stood up, swaying slightly. Started in English. A man walks into a bar. They looked bored. Then I switched to perfect Russian. But seriously, you know the difference between American vodka and Russian vodka? American vodka is like American friendship. Looks clean, tastes like nothing, gives you a headache. Russian vodka is like Russian friendship. Hurts at first, might kill you, but if you survive, you're brothers for life. Dead silence. Victor's shot glass stopped halfway to his mouth. How long? He asked in Russian. 6 months, I replied in Russian. Every morning, every night. You listened to us mock you and said nothing. A wise man speaks when he has something to say. Victor walked over, put both hands on my shoulders. All vodka, every glass. We lied. I know. Pavel explained after the 2nd round. Victor laughed, really laughed. Katya, your American is actually Russian. She ran in, saw me speaking Russian with her father. You learned Russian? Surprise? That's when the room started properly spinning. Victor caught me before I hit the ground. I woke up 45 minutes later on the couch with the worst headache of my life. Victor was sitting next to me. You could have said something earlier. Saved yourself 20 shots. Would you have respected me? No. He paused. You marry her. I give permission. My heart exploded with joy. Victor, the impossible father-in-law, had given his blessing. I stumbled to the bathroom to splash water on my face, already imagining telling Katya the good news. She'd gone upstairs earlier, probably to let her father handle me. I was about to knock on her door when I heard her voice through the thin walls. On the phone, speaking Russian, I froze, my hand an inch from the door. We can't sleep together anymore, she was saying in Russian. I'll tell my boyfriend I got pregnant. My blood turned to ice water. Suddenly sober. No, Alexei, listen to me. The same Alexei who owned 3 auto shops. It's getting too complicated. Silence. Then, fine. One more time. But after that, we're done. He's actually serious about marrying me. I stood there, hand still raised to knock. 20 shots of vodka churning in my stomach along with something worse. I walked through the door to confront her. Open at it without knocking, and her head snapped up from the phone, eyes going wide when she saw me standing there. She fumbled the phone, nearly dropped it, then pressed it to her chest like that would somehow erase what I'd just heard. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Just this weird gasping sound like she couldn't get air. I stood in the doorway watching her face cycle through shock, then fear, then something that looked like calculation as she tried to figure out how much I'd understood. She started speaking in English, asking what I was doing, why I didn't knock. But I cut her off in Russian, telling her I heard everything, every single word. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. She ended the call without even looking at the phone, just stabbed at the screen until it went dark, then set it on her nightstand with shaking hands. The tears started then, not the pretty kind you see in movies, but the ugly kind that make your face red and your nose run. She switched to Russian, and the words came pouring out about pressure from her mother, about how Alexei's family and hers have been friends since before she was born, about Sunday dinners where everyone assumed they'd eventually marry, about her father pushing her to date Americans to prove she wasn't narrow-minded, but her mother crying about losing Russian traditions. She talked about thinking she could manage both relationships, keep everyone happy, figure it out later when she had more time to decide. I just stood there feeling the room tilt slightly, the vodka mixing with adrenaline in a way that made everything too sharp and too blurry at the same time. Heavy footsteps came up the stairs, and Victor appeared behind me in the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to concern as he read the scene. He asked in Russian what was happening, and Katya tried to speak, but Victor raised one hand, and the words died in her throat. He looked at me and asked in Russian what I'd heard, and there was something in his voice that told me he already suspected. I told him in Russian that his daughter has been seeing Alexei our entire relationship and was planning to fake a pregnancy to cover it up. The silence that followed felt like it had weight, like the air itself got heavier. Victor's jaw clenched and he asked Katya for her phone in that same calm voice he'd used during the drinking test, the one that somehow carried more authority than yelling ever could. She started to protest, but he just extended his hand and waited, and after maybe 10 seconds she handed it over. He scrolled through messages, his face getting harder with each swipe, then handed the phone back without a word. He told her in Russian that she'd shamed herself and their family, that dishonesty was worse than any choice she could have made honestly, that he'd rather she'd told him she wanted to marry Alexei than watch her lie to everyone. The vodka hit me harder then, the adrenaline fading and leaving just the 17 shots of Samagon burning through my system. My legs felt unreliable, and I sat down on her bed because standing seemed like it might not work much longer. The room swayed gently, and my stomach reminded me that I'd consumed enough alcohol to kill a smaller person. Victor noticed immediately and asked in Russian if I was all right, his tone shifting to something almost gentle, and the concern in his voice made everything worse because less than an hour ago, he'd given me permission to marry his daughter. I told Victor in Russian that I appreciated his earlier approval, but obviously things had changed and I needed to leave. Katya grabbed my arm then, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt, and switched to English, begging me to let her explain properly, to understand that she does love me, that she was going to choose me eventually. Her hand felt hot on my arm, and I could feel her shaking, or maybe I was shaking, hard to tell with the vodka distorting everything. I removed her hand gently, and asked in Russian when exactly she was planning to end things with Alexei, and she went quiet for a long moment, before admitting she hadn't yet, because she was afraid of disappointing both families. The honesty hit worse than the lies because it confirmed she'd never actually intended to fully commit to either of us, just kept both options open indefinitely. Victor told Katya in Russian to go downstairs and tell the guests the evening was over, that there'd been a family situation. She protested, saying she needed to explain more, but Victor repeated the instruction with finality, and she left the room with tears streaming down her face. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, and then her voice downstairs speaking to her mother in Russian, too quiet to make out words. Victor sat down in Katya's desk chair, the one with a jacket draped over it and textbooks stacked underneath, and asked in Russian if I wanted water or food, the same Zakuski he'd denied me during the test. I accepted water because my mouth felt like I'd been chewing sand, and my head had started pounding in rhythm with my heartbeat. He left and came back maybe 2 minutes later with a large glass of water and some bread on a small plate, setting both on the nightstand next to Katya's phone. He told me in Russian that I'd earned his respect tonight, but he'd understand if I wanted nothing to do with his family now. I drank half the water in one long gulp and told him I needed time to think clearly, that 17 shots of Samagon wasn't the best state for major decisions. Victor actually smiled slightly at that and said in Russian that I'd held my alcohol better than most men twice my age, and it was a shame his daughter couldn't be honest like I was. The compliment felt surreal sitting in his daughter's bedroom, processing her betrayal while he praised my drinking capacity. I asked Victor in Russian if he'd known about Alexei, and he admitted he knew they had history, but thought it ended when Katya started dating me. He said in Russian that he wouldn't have put me through the test if he'd known she was dishonoring both relationships, that the whole point was testing worthiness for a woman who deserved it. Downstairs I heard voices, and then the front door closing as guests left, Dimitri's voice saying something about coming back another time, Pavel thanking Natalia for the evening. I realized I'd have to walk past everyone to get out of this house, and the thought made my stomach turn. Victor seemed to read my mind and offered in Russian to have me leave through the back door to avoid questions. I told him in Russian that I'd rather walk out the front door with my head up. that I had nothing to hide or be ashamed of. Victor studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly and said in Russian that this was exactly why he gave his blessing in the first place, that I had the kind of strength his daughter clearly lacked. The words hit hard because they confirmed what I was feeling, but didn't want to admit. We walked downstairs together, Victor slightly ahead of me like he was leading the way, and I could hear voices getting louder as we got closer to the living room. Dmitri, Pavel, and Sergei were standing near the couch looking confused and uncomfortable, while Katya stood by the kitchen doorway talking rapidly to her mother in Russian, her hands moving in quick gestures. Everyone went completely silent when Victor and I appeared at the bottom of the stairs. The sudden quiet felt heavy and awkward, like everyone knew something bad had happened, but nobody wanted to ask what. Victor cleared his throat and announced in Russian that the engagement plans were canceled due to family circumstances he would explain later, and that I was leaving with his full respect and approval. I watched the three men look back and forth between me and Katya, their faces slowly changing as they figured out what must have happened. Sergei shook his head slightly and muttered something under his breath that I couldn't quite catch. Katya's mother, Natalia, broke away from her daughter and walked toward me, her expression sad and apologetic. She said in heavily accented English that she was very sorry for whatever had happened tonight, and I thanked her in Russian for the wonderful hospitality and the food. Her eyes widened with surprise when she heard me speak Russian. Then her face fell as the realization hit her that I probably understood every word of every conversation that happened in this house tonight. She touched my arm gently and said something in Russian about wishing things could have been different. I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack near the door and picked up the bottle of vodka I'd brought, which was still sitting unopened on the side table since we'd spent the whole night drinking Victor's homemade samagon instead. Pavel stepped forward and stopped me just as I reached for the doorknob, saying in Russian that I was welcome at the factory card games any Tuesday night, that I'd proven myself tonight regardless of what his daughter chose to do. The invitation surprised me and I thanked him, though I had no idea if I'd ever actually take him up on it. I pulled open the front door, and the cold November air hit me like a physical force, sharp and biting after the warmth of the house. I had to grab onto the porch railing to steady myself because suddenly the full weight of everything crashed down at once. The 17 shots of vodka and the emotional destruction combining into something that made my legs feel weak and unreliable. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call a car, because driving was absolutely impossible in my current state. The screen was too bright and the letters kept swimming around, making it hard to focus on the app. I managed to request a ride, and then just stood there on the porch, breathing the cold air and trying not to think about Katya inside, probably crying to her mother. While I waited, I opened my texts and messaged my friend Walt, asking if I could crash at his place tonight because I couldn't face going back to my empty apartment yet. He responded within maybe 30 seconds asking if I was okay and saying his door was open whenever I got there. The car showed up about 10 minutes later, some guy in a Honda who took one look at me and didn't try to make conversation. The ride to Walt's apartment in Brooklyn was mostly a blur of streetlights and traffic signals, my head pressed against the cold window while my stomach churned and rolled. I kept replaying Katya's phone conversation in my mind, hearing her voice saying those words about sleeping with Alexei one more time, about telling me she was pregnant. The driver had to say my name twice when we arrived, because I was so lost in my own head. I stumbled out of the car and up the steps to Walt's building, my fingers clumsy on the buzzer. Walt met me at his apartment door and I barely made it past him to the bathroom before throwing up violently, my body finally rejecting all that vodka. He held my hair back without saying anything, then got me water and helped me to his couch when I was done. I passed out almost immediately, still wearing my jacket. I woke up at 4 in the morning with the absolute worst hangover of my entire life, my head pounding so hard I could feel my pulse in my eyeballs, and my stomach still doing flips. But the physical pain was somehow nothing compared to the emotional pain of replaying that phone conversation over and over in my mind. Walt had left 2 ibuprofen and a bottle of blue Gatorade on the coffee table next to me, along with a note written on a napkin saying he was in his room if I needed anything. I took the pills and drank half the Gatorade, then just lay there staring at the ceiling in the dark. I spent the next few hours like that, watching the room slowly get lighter as the sun came up, my phone sitting on my chest. Around 6, I finally looked at it and saw 3 missed calls from Katya and 1 long text message written entirely in Russian. She was apologizing and asking to talk, explaining that things were complicated and she needed to make me understand what really happened. I read it twice and then just put the phone face down on the coffee table because I honestly had no idea what to say or if there was even anything left worth saying between us. I stayed like that for another hour, the phone getting heavier on my chest with each minute that passed. Around 7, I heard Walt's bedroom door open and his footsteps padding to the kitchen. The coffee maker started gurgling, and the smell of brewing coffee filled the apartment, somehow making my headache worse and better at the same time. He didn't say anything, just moved around the kitchen making noise that let me know he was there if I needed him. I sat up slowly, my head pounding with every movement, and walked to the kitchen table where he'd set out 2 mugs. He poured coffee into both and sat down across from me, waiting. I started talking in English, telling him everything from the beginning. 6 months of Russian lessons, the podcast during my commute, the old men at the bathhouse, the drinking test with Victor and his friends, 17 shots of Samagon, Victor giving his blessing, walking upstairs to tell Katya the good news, Hearing her voice through the door speaking Russian to Alexei, the affair, the pregnancy plan, Victor reading the messages. All of it came out in one long stream while Walt just listened and drank his coffee and didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he refilled both our mugs and sat back in his chair. He asked if I was planning to give Katya a chance to explain herself. I told him I didn't know if explanations mattered when the basic facts were so clear. She'd been sleeping with Alexei our entire relationship. She'd planned to fake a pregnancy. What explanation could possibly change those things? Walt nodded and took another sip of coffee before pointing out that I'd invested 6 months in learning an entire language for this relationship. Maybe I owed it to myself to have one final conversation with clarity instead of vodka. Not for her sake, but for mine. To actually hear what she had to say without being drunk and shocked. To ask the questions that would keep me up at night if I didn't ask them now. I sat there thinking about that while my coffee got cold. He was right. I needed to hear it from her directly. Needed to understand what actually happened. Needed to close this properly instead of just running away from it. I pulled out my phone and typed out a message in Russian, saying I'd meet her tomorrow at a neutral location to talk, but I wasn't making any promises about the outcome. Her response came back within maybe 20 seconds, also in Russian, thanking me and suggesting a coffee shop in Manhattan that was halfway between our apartments. I confirmed the time and put my phone away. The rest of the day passed in a weird fog of physical recovery. Walt ordered Chinese food around noon, and we ate it while watching some mindless action movie on TV. He gave me space to process everything without being completely alone, which was exactly what I needed. He didn't ask more questions or try to give advice, just existed in the same space and let me work through things in my head. I kept running through every interaction with Katya over the past 6 months, trying to spot the signs I'd missed. The times she'd been unavailable or vague about her plans. The weekends she said she was visiting family, the nights she couldn't stay over because of early morning commitments. But mostly I just remembered normal relationship stuff. Dinners and movies and conversations and laughing together, which somehow made it worse because it meant she was really good at living a double life. That night I finally went back to my own apartment, and it felt wrong the second I walked through the door. Like the space had been contaminated by how much of myself I'd poured into the relationship that occupied it. My Russian textbooks were stacked on the desk exactly where I'd left them. My notes from language practice were scattered around. Flashcards with vocabulary words, a notebook filled with conjugation tables, physical evidence of my dedication sitting there mocking me. I spent an hour going through my phone and laptop, looking at messages and photos with Katya, trying to spot the lies in retrospect. There was a photo from 3 weeks ago where we'd gone to this Russian restaurant in Brighton Beach, and she'd been so happy that I could order in Russian. I remembered thinking that night that everything was perfect. Looking at her smile in that photo now, I couldn't tell if it was real or fake. Some dates seemed suspicious with the benefit of hindsight. A Saturday afternoon she'd canceled last minute saying her mom needed help. A Thursday evening she'd left early claiming a work emergency. But mostly she'd just been good at keeping the two parts of her life separate. I picked up my phone and called Torbjorn, my Russian tutor. He answered on the third ring, and I told him in Russian that I needed to pause lessons for a while due to personal circumstances. He asked if everything was okay, and I gave him a brief version of events. Learning Russian to impress girlfriend's father. Passing the test. Discovering the affair. He was quiet for a moment, and then said in Russian that at least my language skills were real, even if the relationship wasn't. The comment hit me harder than I expected because it was true. I genuinely love the Russian language and culture now. The way words fit together. The history behind certain phrases. The different mindset you had to adopt to think in Russian instead of English. But it was all tangled up with my motivation for learning. I'd started because of Katya. Because I wanted to impress Victor. Because I was desperate to prove myself worthy. How much of my love for Russian was actually mine, and how much was just me performing for someone else? I didn't have an answer to that. I pulled out a notebook and started preparing for tomorrow's conversation. Writing down questions I needed answered. Boundaries I needed to set. Treating it like a business meeting because emotions had gotten me into this mess. When did the affair with Alexei start relative to our relationship? Does Alexei know about me? What was the actual plan with the fake pregnancy? Does she love me? Or was I just rebellion against family pressure? What does she actually want now? I filled 3 pages with questions and sub-questions, organizing them by topic and priority. It felt mechanical and cold, but that seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Victor's face when he'd read those messages on Katya's phone. The disappointment of a father who'd raised his daughter with certain values, only to see her betray them. He'd given me his blessing based on strength and honesty, and then discovered his own daughter lacked both. I wondered if he was having a similar sleepless night across the river in Queens. If he was questioning where he'd gone wrong as a parent. If he was angry at Katya or angry at himself. The alarm on my phone went off at 7 even though I'd barely slept. I showered and dressed in clothes I'd laid out the night before, moving on autopilot while my brain ran through the questions I'd written down. The subway ride to Manhattan felt longer than usual. Every stop another minute to second guess whether this conversation would change anything or just confirm what I already knew. I arrived at the coffee shop 40 minutes early and bought a black coffee I didn't really want, just to justify claiming the corner table in the back where we could talk without being overheard. The table was small and round with 2 chairs facing each other, no escape routes or comfortable distance. I pulled out my phone and reviewed my list of questions one more time, then put it away because I'd memorized them anyway. Other customers came and went, ordering complicated drinks and chatting about normal problems like work deadlines and weekend plans, and I felt completely separate from their world. Katya walked through the door at exactly 9 o'clock, looking like she hadn't slept any better than me. Her eyes were puffy and red, her hair pulled back in a messy way that would normally be cute, but today just looked tired, and she wore an oversized sweater like she was trying to disappear inside it. She saw me in the corner and walked over without stopping at the counter, sliding into the chair across from me and folding her hands on the table. I took a breath and started in English because I wanted to be completely clear about the rules. I needed honest answers to direct questions, and if she lied or tried to dodge anything, I was walking out immediately, and we'd be done forever. She nodded and switched to Russian, saying she understood, that she owed me complete honesty even if it hurt to hear or say. Her voice was quiet and a little rough, like she'd been crying recently. I asked my first question in English, keeping my tone flat and factual. When did the thing with Alexei start compared to us dating? She looked down at her hands and admitted in Russian that they never really broke up before she started seeing me. Her father had been pushing her to date American guys to expand her horizons and experience different options, but her mother and Alexei's family expected them to eventually get married. She'd been trying to figure out what she wanted while keeping everyone happy, which meant keeping both relationships going. The casual way she explained it made my stomach turn because it meant our entire 6 months together had been built on a lie from day one. I asked if Alexei knew about me, and she said yes immediately. He knew the whole time. She described how patient he'd been, how understanding, how he was willing to wait for her to figure out what she really wanted. The way she talked about his patience made something click in my head. I was never the main relationship in her mind, just the experiment her father approved of, the American option she was testing out while Alexei waited as the safe backup plan. I could feel my hands getting tight around my coffee cup, so I set it down before I crushed it. I asked about the pregnancy plan I'd heard on the phone, and she started crying again but kept talking in Russian. She'd panicked when I started getting really serious about marriage, and her father gave his blessing, suddenly realizing she'd have to actually choose instead of just drifting between both of us. She thought if she told me she was pregnant with my baby, it would force the decision and end the awful in-between state she'd been living in. I pointed out that her plan would have trapped me in a relationship based on a complete lie, maybe for years, and asked if she'd thought about that at all. She wiped her eyes and admitted in Russian that she wasn't thinking clearly, that she felt cornered by everyone's expectations pulling her in different directions. Her mother wanted Alexei, her father wanted me, Alexei's family had expectations, and she just wanted someone to make the choice for her so she wouldn't have to. I asked the hardest question, the one I'd been avoiding because I was scared of the answer. Did she actually love me, or was I just a way to rebel against family pressure while keeping Alexei as backup? She went quiet for a long time, staring at the table between us, and I could see her trying to figure out how to answer. Finally, she said in Russian that she did love me, but she also loved Alexei, and she honestly didn't know how to choose between her father's approval and her family's expectations. The answer was somehow worse than a simple no, because it meant everything between us had been real to her, but also not enough. I told her in Russian that she didn't have to choose anymore because I was making the choice for both of us. I was done, completely finished, not interested in being anyone's option or experiment or backup plan. She reached across the table to grab my hand, but I pulled back before she could touch me. I switched to English and told her I deserved someone who chose me clearly and completely, not someone who kept me as one possibility among several. Her face crumpled and she asked in Russian if there was anything she could do to fix this, any way to prove she'd commit to me fully now that she understood what she was losing. I told her in Russian that trust wasn't something you could rebuild from absolutely nothing, that she'd need to prove honesty over months or years, and I wasn't willing to invest that kind of time in someone who'd already shown me exactly who they were. I stood up and put my jacket on while she sat there looking up at me with tears running down her face. She asked in Russian if I hated her, and I thought about it for a second before answering honestly. No, I didn't hate her. I hated the situation and the choices she'd made, but I understood she'd been caught between impossible expectations from every direction. I added in Russian that I hoped she figured out what she actually wanted for herself, instead of just trying to make everyone else happy, because this pattern would destroy her eventually. I walked out of the coffee shop into the cold morning air and didn't look back. I pulled out my phone while standing on the sidewalk and opened a text to Victor, typing in Russian that I wanted to meet him separately to talk about what happens next. His response came back in under 2 minutes, also in Russian, saying yes and suggesting the bench in the park near his house where he walks his dog every evening around 6. I texted back confirming and then started walking toward the subway, my hands shaking slightly from the coffee and the conversation and everything that just ended. The train ride back to my apartment felt long, and I kept rereading Victor's text, surprised he wanted to meet at all given that his daughter just blew up both our lives. I got home and tried to work but couldn't focus, so I just sat on my couch staring at the Russian textbooks on my desk until it was time to leave again. I took the train back to Queens and walked to the park, arriving a few minutes early. Victor was already sitting on the bench throwing pieces of bread to some pigeons, and when he looked up at me, I noticed he seemed older somehow, like the last 2 days had aged him in a way the drinking test never showed. He stood and shook my hand, then we both sat down, and he said in Russian that he appreciated me coming, that he'd spent the last 2 days thinking hard about where he went wrong as a father. I started to say something, but he held up his hand and continued in Russian, explaining how he pushed Katya to date outside the Russian community. Because he wanted her to have more choices than just the factory boys, but he never understood the pressure her mother was putting on her from the other direction to marry someone like Alexei. Victor went quiet for a minute, and then started telling me a story in Russian about his own past, about a woman he loved before he married Natalia. He said her name was Irina, and they were together for 3 years, planning to get married, until he came home early from military service one weekend and found her in bed with his best friend Mikhail. He said the betrayal changed him completely, made him hard and suspicious, and when Katya started dating, he created these tests to make sure no man would hurt her the way Irina hurt him. He explained in Russian that he thought testing for strength and the ability to endure pain would protect his daughter from making his mistakes. But now he realized he was testing completely the wrong things. I asked him what he meant by that, and Victor said in Russian that he tested my ability to drink poison and sit through discomfort and keep secrets. But what he should have done was test Katya's ability to be honest when things got hard. He admitted the drinking games were partly about reliving his military days, and partly about having control over something when he felt like his daughter was slipping away into a world he didn't understand. We sat there not talking for a while, just watching the sun start to go down over the houses and the dog walkers passing by on the path. Then Victor said in Russian that he was officially taking back his blessing to marry Katya, but he wanted me to know the respect he showed me that night was completely real and had nothing to do with his daughter's choices. I told him in Russian that his respect meant something important to me, regardless of what happened with Katya, that earning it taught me things about my own strength I didn't know before. Victor asked what I planned to do with my Russian language skills now, and I admitted I hadn't decided yet if continuing to study felt real, or if it would just remind me of the relationship every time I practiced. He said in Russian that the language belonged to me now, that I earned it through months of hard work, and it wasn't connected to Katya anymore unless I let it be. Before we stood up to leave, Victor pulled out his phone and made me save his number, then said in Russian that I was welcome anytime at the factory card games on Thursday nights, or at the bathhouse on weekends, that the community didn't have to be closed off to me just because his daughter made bad choices. The offer caught me off guard, but I thanked him and said I'd think about it, and we shook hands again before walking in opposite directions. The next week I buried myself in work and avoided anything connected to Russian language or culture, letting it all sit untouched while I tried to figure out who I was without the relationship defining me. My apartment felt too quiet, and I kept noticing small things that reminded me of Katya, like the Russian tea she liked in my cabinet, or the photo of us at Coney Island stuck to my fridge. Walt texted me every day checking in, and on Friday he came over with pizza and beer, and we watched basketball without talking about anything serious until the third quarter, when he said I should probably talk to someone professional about processing everything that happened. I knew he was right because I wasn't sleeping well, and I kept having imaginary conversations with Katya in my head where I said all the things I didn't say at the coffee shop. On Monday morning, I looked up therapists who dealt with relationship stuff and found Denise McHugh, who had good reviews and specialized in trauma from betrayal and identity issues. I called her office and got an appointment for Wednesday afternoon, and when the day came, I showed up 15 minutes early because I'm always early to everything. Her office was in a building near Union Square with comfortable chairs and plants everywhere, and when she called me in, she had me sit on a couch while she sat in a chair across from me with a notepad. I explained the whole situation from start to finish, from the 6 months of secret Russian lessons to Victor's drinking test to overhearing Katya's phone call, and Denise listened without interrupting and took notes occasionally. When I finished, she asked me why I thought I chose such a complicated approach to winning Victor's approval, instead of just being myself, and the question hit me harder than I expected, because I didn't have a good answer ready. I sat there staring at Denise, my mind going back through all those early mornings with Russian podcasts, all those nights watching Soviet movies with subtitles, all those weekends at the bathhouse listening to old men argue about politics. She leaned forward and asked me what I was thinking about, and I told her I was trying to figure out if any of it meant anything, now that the whole reason for doing it turned out to be fake. Denise shook her head and said the reason might have started with Katya, but somewhere along the way, it became about me, about proving I could commit to something hard and see it through. She pointed out that most people talk about learning languages, but I actually did it, that I showed up every single day for 6 months and pushed through the frustration and the difficulty. I asked her how that was supposed to help me now, and she said those qualities don't disappear just because one relationship ended. That dedication and discipline follow you into everything else you do. The session ended with her giving me homework to write down 3 things I learned about myself through the whole experience that had nothing to do with Katya or Victor. I left her office feeling slightly less like everything had been a waste, though I still wasn't ready to open my Russian textbooks or listen to any podcasts. 2 weeks crawled by with me avoiding anything connected to Russian culture, throwing myself into work projects and hanging out with Walt watching basketball. My phone buzzed one Tuesday morning while I was making coffee, and I saw a text in Russian from Katya. My stomach dropped and I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won out. She wrote that she told Alexei everything about us, about her plan, about all the lies, and that she ended things with him completely. She said she needed time alone to figure out who she actually was, instead of who everyone expected her to be. That she was sorry for the pain she caused both of us. I read it 3 times, translated every word carefully in my head to make sure I understood correctly. Part of me felt good that she finally told the truth to everyone, that she stopped hiding and manipulating. Another part felt sad because it meant she was really dealing with consequences now, facing her family's disappointment and Alexei's anger and her own guilt. I typed out a response twice and deleted it both times, finally deciding that silence was the right answer. She needed to figure herself out without me responding or engaging or giving her any kind of validation. I put my phone down and finished making my coffee, noticing that my hand was steady and my chest didn't feel tight anymore. 3 days later, Victor texted me in Russian with an update I wasn't expecting. He said Katya moved out of the family house temporarily to stay with a friend, that everyone needed space to process everything that happened. He told me the whole family started going to therapy together, working through the cultural pressure issues that contributed to the situation. He wrote that Natalia finally admitted she'd been pushing Katya toward Alexei behind his back, while he was pushing her toward American boyfriends, and Katya got caught in the middle trying to please everyone. Victor said he took responsibility for creating impossible standards and using his drinking tests as a way to control who his daughters dated. The message was longer than anything he'd sent before, more open and honest than I'd ever heard him be. He ended by saying he hoped I was doing okay, and that the invitation to card games and the bathhouse still stood whenever I was ready. I wrote back thanking him for the update and telling him I appreciated his honesty, that maybe I'd take him up on the bathhouse invitation soon. It felt strange maintaining a relationship with my ex-girlfriend's father, but the connection felt real in a way that had nothing to do with Katya anymore. Saturday morning came and I woke up early without setting an alarm, my body still programmed from months of early Russian study sessions. I lay in bed for a while thinking about Denise's homework assignment, about what I'd actually learned through everything. Then I got up, got dressed, and took the subway to Brighton Beach without really deciding to do it. The bathhouse looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago, when I first started coming here. Same faded sign, same old men shuffling in with their towels. I paid my entry fee and headed inside, the familiar smell of steam and eucalyptus hitting me immediately. I found a spot on one of the wooden benches and just sat there listening to the men around me speaking Russian, complaining about their health and politics and their ungrateful children. For the first time in weeks, I let myself actually hear the language instead of avoiding it, let the words wash over me without connecting them to Katya, or the test, or any of the pain. I realized I was here because I wanted to be, because I liked the heat and the atmosphere and the feeling of understanding conversations happening around me. Pavel spotted me from across the room, and his face broke into a smile, waving me over to where he sat with Dmitry and Sergei playing cards. I stood up and walked over, accepting the cards Pavel dealt me, and settled into the game feeling like maybe the 6 months weren't completely wasted after all. I'd learned a language that now belonged to me, earned respect from people who didn't give it easily, and discovered I was strong enough to walk away from someone I loved when staying would have meant accepting lies. The cards felt good in my hands, and the Russian banter felt natural coming out of my mouth, and I realized this was mine now, regardless of how it started. So that's the complete breakdown of how language learning for relationship purposes became genuine cultural connection, despite betrayal. If you found this analysis of cross-cultural relationships informative, hit that like button. Subscribe for more detailed stories about navigating identity and boundaries, and I've linked resources on language learning motivation in the description. Thanks for watching.